right. For more on Airbnb's prospects in China, I'm joined live by Christopher Marquis. He's the professor of management at Cornell University. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Welcome to be here, Michelle. Thank you.
Well, Chris, Airbnb has partnered with China Broadband Capital and Sequoia Capital China, and it looks like the main priority right now is to promote Airbnb for use by Chinese travelers to other countries. It's not a bad plan if you keep in mind that 109 million Chinese tourists traveled overseas last year alone. And Chris, it seems that the strategy is to build a loyal following of Chinese visitors to the US and elsewhere first. What do you think of that move?
Yeah, I think as a first step in trying to crack the China market, that makes a lot of sense. I think that, as you mentioned, there's booming travel among Chinese going outbound, going to Europe, going to America, and to try to establish the brand of Airbnb among those travelers makes tremendous sense. I think also the whole idea of sort of the shared economy, people opening their homes to travelers, is new in China. And I think that actually the more that Airbnb can introduce this model, I think the better for them as the market leader. So I think that, there are tremendous positives associated with this strategy.
Chris, the second phase is then to get Chinese travelers to use Airbnb domestically in China. And that could be a little bit more challenging. There's already competition there, particularly from Tujia. So how does Airbnb differentiate itself? What are the challenges that it faces domestically?
Yeah, I think there's huge challenges domestically, and I think that, this is the market that they want to crack. And Uber's had some success with car sharing. I think that the Tujia example, which you just mentioned, provides a lot of insight into just really how hard it is for Airbnb to crack this. The model that Tujia has actually is much more like a property management model, and this actually helps bridge the gap between consumers and consumer-to-consumer transactions. In China, there's big issues of trust. This was how Alibaba, Alibaba's Taobao service was able to really defeat eBay by actually having ways to establish trust from buyers of consumer-to-consumer sellers.
What do you mean by issues of trust? Let's expand on that a little bit. Why is that different than anywhere else in the world?
Yeah, so I think that many times Chinese consumers might be afraid that actually the person that's selling the product might not deliver. When you go to the house, or the house for shared living, it might not be as it seems. It might not be clean.
But isn't that the case when you use Airbnb anywhere in the world, that you have these hesitations, that it's not as advertised?
I think there's tremendous hesitations, and I, in particular, may not actually be as interested in using Airbnb as many consumers may not. But I think in China, there is actually, in consumer-to-consumer transactions, a much higher sort of threshold of trust that has to be overcome. And I think that Tujia has established a lot of mechanisms to overcome this. I think like Alibaba's Taobao did as well. And I think for Airbnb to compete effectively in China, they're going to have to actually develop their own ways of sort of overcoming consumers' issues with trust.
So change the system, the rating system is not going to cut the mustard in China, you think?
So I think the rating system helps, certainly. eBay has a great rating system, and that didn't help them in China either. I think that, one issue with the rating system is that, there's incentives for both buyers and sellers to give positive ratings because, actually the person who's staying in the Airbnb actually is rated as well. And if they have bad ratings, then they won't be accepted into other Airbnbs. So I think that, there are, the rating system doesn't cure everything.
Well, is the plan also to get foreigners to visit China and then opt for Airbnb rather than hotels? And Chris, how likely is that given cultural differences and language barriers?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that actually there has been some success in foreigners using Airbnb in China. Personally, I know a number of people who've used it to much success. They're big fans of it. I think that most of the people, though, most of the hosts are actually expats. Actually getting the sort of everyday, ordinary Chinese to open their homes, like you mentioned, there's cultural issues, there's language issues. It's very hard to have a consumer-to-consumer transaction if you don't speak the same language. So I think that there are sort of big issues in having it having the foreigner market grow beyond just expats.
Do you see this impacting the hotel industry and the more traditional hospitality industry in China?
Not yet. I think that actually it will take some time before there's any impact to the regular hotel market. I read recently that I think that there's estimates that Airbnb in large cities is, maybe taking 10% of the revenues from hotels. And I think in China, an issue, which I think for all of these services is a challenge, is that actually you can get pretty well-priced, good hotels. Unlike going in Europe or large cities in America, where the gap between Airbnb and good hotels is quite large, in China, it's actually not that large. And so, I think for the budget-minded travelers that are really interested in choosing Airbnb, the incentives are not there in China like they are other places.
Maybe stick to a 5-star hotel if the prices aren't that different. All right, thanks so much, Chris Marquis, Professor of Management at Cornell University. And as you heard, Airbnb